Today is Friday, November 1st, 2024. My name is John Raymond Irving, and I am in Blacksburg, Virginia at the Newman Library. Joining me today for an oral history interview is Joseph Burnett. This interview is part of an oral history project with Virginia Tech alumni who served in the Vietnam War. Before we get started, Mr. Burnett, do I have your permission to record this interview?
Yes.
Excellent. So, Mr. Burnett, just to give you a brief idea of how this interview typically goes, I'm going to try my best to follow somewhat chronologically through your life, starting with, biographical information, your background, your childhood, and then we'll work your way through college and your military service and your time after the service too, okay?
Yeah.
So, just to get started, when were you born and where was that?
December 19th, 1944 in Lynchburg, Virginia.
Did you grow up in Lynchburg as well?
Yes.
And was that all the way through high school, or did you move around at all as a kid?
No, it was all the way through high school.
What did your parents do when you were younger?
I never knew.
No?
No. I was born in 44. My father was in the Navy in World War II. And my mother worked at a shoe company in Lynchburg. Lynchburg was famous for shoes at that time, one of the richest cities in the country.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
And in fact, he was at D-Day on a destroyer off the coast of Omaha Beach.
Wow.
And ironically, my sister is married to a guy whose father and some of his brothers were on the beach. They were part of the boys of Bedford, Virginia.
Wow.
Bedford had the highest body count, per capita of any city in the country. And so they were laying down fire on the beach, prepping, the beach for the assault. And they didn't take out the machine guns. In fact, I don't think they even knew they were there. And so they were torn up to sit there and watch other Americans get cut to shreds on the beach. So so the captain gave the order to, go in further than they were, technically allowed to, because they might founder and not be able to get out. So they got in, they went in as far as they could and tried to take out the machine gun nest with the guns they had on board the ship.
Yeah.
And they were successful, to some extent.
Wow.
So that was, a little interesting thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Very interesting. Was your father in the Army as well?
No, just the Navy.
Navy? Gotcha.
That was enough.
I'm sorry. When I said as well, I meant as well as you. I didn't realize you'd said he was in the Navy.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry.
Well, that's awesome. Was his service in any way influential in your decision to join the military?
No, my decision was based on the fact that, well, go back when I joined the Corps and matriculated at Virginia Tech. My goal was to go into the Army, but my grades took me in a different direction because because at the end of your sophomore year, you have to decide whether to take a contract or not. And if I took a contract, there was only one direction I would be heading, and that would be infantry, which I didn't find attractive at the time. And so my goal was to, and at the time you could only take an Army contract or take a Marine contract. You couldn't take a Navy contract. And so you had to wait till your senior year, then you had to take the Navy exam, naval entry exam, and and then go to OCS, go to naval OCS, and come out that way. I had already been accepted at graduate school at Georgia, and in Athens, Georgia, the Navy had their supply corps school, and so I said, well, that's a good fit, because I'm not gonna be able to serve on the ship anyway because of my eyesight. So I'll go to Naval OCS there in Athens, Georgia, and while I'm there, save up some money, maybe buy a house, and then when I get out, I can have it all set up to go to grad school there. And so went ahead and took the Navy naval entrance exam and passed that, and then went to Richmond and took the physical. Came back and thought everything was straight, and then I got a letter saying that I had failed the physical. And I said, what's the deal? And they said, your eyesight. And I said, yeah, but you're offering a waiver for eyesight. And he said, no, sir. We stopped that the first of the year. And in fact, we probably won't take more than one or two people from Virginia Tech, and they're going to be top of the class. Yeah. So we suggest you call your draft board and see what they have in mind. So I did, and I was number 4 on their hit parade list. So I had to, and I was graduating in December because I was in civil engineering, as we talked about earlier. But once I hit calculus and some of the coursework that were based on that, I was having tough sledding, and it was not my intention when I decided to go to Tech to go through an engineering curriculum. I wanted to be a landscape architect, which they didn't have a degree at the time, but they said, we're working on it. We'll have one, probably by the end of the year, 2 years at the most. So just go ahead and pick any engineering curriculum, because the coursework's going to be about the same in first year, and then you can switch to landscape architecture. It was 5 years after I graduated before they finally got it set up.
Well, that sounds incredibly on brand for Virginia Tech.
That's right. So I was
the gym that was supposed to be built, 3 years before I got here just got built this one.
So time was running out, and so I went I couldn't finish up when I went ahead and dropped out of engineering and went across campus and enrolled in the College of Agriculture in the School of Horticulture, because it was horticulture and architecture that were duking it out as to who was going to have the landscape architecture degree. And architecture ended up winning, but horticulture was teaching a landscape design course, which was basically, the same. And so I had a year and a half to do that. And I just went, straight through spring quarter, started winter quarter. And then I was taking an overload. I was taking 20 some hours, and several weeks into the quarter, I just sold all my books because I didn't have time to read the books anymore. And my classes were starting at 8 o'clock, and some of the labs were going to 8 o'clock at night. So I didn't make it through organic chemistry, and then I said, well, fine, then I'll take it next quarter. No, sorry, we don't teach it. We're not going to teach it spring quarter. We're not going to teach it again until fall. So, oh gosh, what am I doing now? So I went on co-op. You know what that is? You work, and then you go to school and you work. anyway, so I went on co-op, and I had met a guy in Fairfax at a conference, horticulture conference, that had a nursery up there, and he was looking for some, people to work, with him. He was an older gentleman. He was looking for somebody to, kind of take over the business at some point. So he was trying to find somebody. So I called him up and told him the situation. He said, "Yeah, sure, come on up." So I went up there and worked for him spring quarter, first quarter, summer school, and then came back last quarter summer school and took a couple of courses. And for the first time in my academic career, I made dean's list.
Good for you.
Made the right move. So
yeah.
So then I, took a full load in fall quarter, and graduated in December. So I was still able to graduate with my class. But I had, so after I graduated, I checked with the draft board again there in Lynchburg, and they said, "Yeah, you need to go ahead and sign up for something, because we're gonna have to draft you."
Yeah.
And so I went around to all the different armed forces, Army, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard. And the best thing that was being offered was a guaranteed contract to, if you signed up for whatever branch of the Army you wanted, they would sign a contract whether you would graduate. If you successfully completed OCS and graduated, you would graduate as a second lieutenant in that branch. So I signed up for engineering because that was the closest thing to what I wanted to do. And they also had delayed enlistment, so you could sign up, but you didn't have to report for duty for 3 months. So I'd become engaged in December. So, and we weren't planning to get married, but then, that gave us an opportunity. So, we went ahead and made plans to get married in the end of March, and then we'd have April, and I had to report the end of April. So that's what we did. We got married in March, and then rented a furnished apartment and lived there for a month, and then reported for duty. And so that was the beginning of my official military career.
Yeah. If I may have you back up just a little bit, I'd love to hear about your service and all that as well. But I'm a little curious about some of the time you spent at Virginia Tech and what that was like.
Yeah.
Do you have any, particularly memorable experiences or, just memories from your time here that you like to share?
Yeah, you familiar with, I don't know what they call it now, but in your freshman year, long about, I guess, winter quarter, it's I forget what they call it, but it's like turnabout day. Mm-hmm. A rat can become an upperclassman for a day.
I'm familiar.
So I had my eye on an upperclassman that I wanted to trade places with. And so we all did that. And so it's their job to make it as difficult for us as rats as they could. So one of the clever things they did was take bottle caps and wedge them in between your door and your door frame, so you couldn't open your door. So fine, okay. So so you want to be upperclassman? Well, you got to get out of your room first. And they would do clever things like throw a glass of water under the door and then shoot some lighter fluid in there and then set it on fire. Or take underarm deodorant, spray deodorant, and hold up a cigarette lighter next to your door plate and spray that and make a blowtorch out of it and melt your door plate. So, all kinds of fun stuff like that.
Boys being boys.
Yeah, that's right. So my roommate, being clever, decided he was going to rescue some rats that were trapped in a room by going to the room above him, the third floor, and pretty big guy up there was going to hold him and lower him down, and he was going to shimmy in the window below. He couldn't hold on, so
gosh.
he fell 3 stories and broke his back.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
That's brutal.
yeah. So that was the highlight of the day.
That's a incredible story, even with a morbid ending.
He didn't have to serve any time in the military, though.
Well, there you go. He got out of Vietnam.
That's right.
So I guess whatever people will do.
That's right. So that was fun. But yeah, we had all kinds of things to do as rats. You had to impress your upperclassmen. They would harass you and tell you don't dare climb up the chimney at the steam plant, and write your class number up there, or put your class number anywhere on campus. If we see it, we're gonna make life miserable for you. And so that means you better do it or you're gonna be in big trouble. So we had guys that climbed the chimney and put L67. I was in L company, put L67 at the above everybody else's on the chimney.
Yeah.
And so stuff like that. We'd have shaving cream battles and wet toilet paper battles and all kinds of stuff.
I'm curious. This is a tradition now. The on the first snow of the year, we have a civilians versus the Corps snowball fight. Was that a thing for you all as well?
I think it was. Obviously, I didn't participate in it, so I don't know if it was or not. But only snow that I really remember is the blizzard of '66, and I had gone over to the horticulture school across drill field from the Upper Quad to study plant materials for a test on Monday. And it was snowing a little bit, and spent several hours over there doing that. When I got out, the snow was getting pretty deep. It was up to your knees.
Oh, wow.
Going back across the drill field. And they never called off class. We don't call off classes at Virginia Tech. I don't care what it is. And so we made it across campus, and everybody was screaming. They're pouring out of their dorms. They called off classes. So, but I forget what the final depth was, but it was something like 3 feet deep.
Wow.
And then.
Okay. So, Mr. Burnett, what years were you at Virginia Tech?
63 through 67.
Mm-hmm. And so you were class of 67? Gotcha. How did you settle on coming to Virginia Tech specifically?
Well, like I say, I wanted to be in landscape architecture. So, I was doing a search for which schools had landscape architecture. And I narrowed it down to Penn State or North Carolina State or Virginia, but I didn't want to go to Virginia.
Yeah.
And my father hated Virginia, so I wasn't going to Virginia. Plus, it was more expensive. And I met with the counselor in high school, and I couldn't see how I was going to be able to afford it anyway. And so she said, well, you ought to take a look at VPI or VMI because you get your clothes free. Mm-hmm. Oh, well, that's a good deal. She said, yeah, so, and if you work, summers and whatever, you could probably, and there's probably some scholarships out there you can qualify for. So we started working on that. And my father found me a job working in the battery factory in Lynchburg because there was a big strike at their main plant up in Minnesota. So they were building all their batteries in Lynchburg. And so they were running 3 shifts. And my cousin was working there. And so she had, had gotten me in the door. And so I was working on the line. at night with some older women and another guy named Hookie, and the battery cases would come down the conveyor belt, and we'd have to put, the plates, whatever you call them, in there, and the whatever whatever the terminals in there, and put the top on it, and put it on a cart, electric cart, and it was my job to push the cart around to the charging room, which is like something out of a Frankenstein movie. With you had to hunker down, and you had like a fence on the top, and you hooked terminals to the battery, and then you hooked it to that fence, and sparks were flying, and hydrochloric acid was in the air, and by the time I finished working there, I forget how many weeks it was at the end of summer, 4 or 5 weeks. My jeans were basically rotting off of me. My shirt was rotting off, and my tennis shoes, the whole sole was rotted from the upper, cloth part.
Wow.
And it was a mess, and there's no telling. And there was no mask. I mean, you were breathing that stuff.
Can't possibly have been good for you, I can't imagine. But so, Mr. Burnett, you were telling me a little bit about your summer job working in Lynchburg at the battery factory. What else did you do for work during your time in college?
Well, see, work in the battery factory that paid for fall quarter uniforms that weren't free, and it probably paid for most of winter quarter. And then on winter break, at 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I forget, it was a pretty long period of time, I worked at Belk's. You know what that is?
No, I don't.
A department store.
Gotcha. I'm not familiar with that one. I apologize.
Okay. And so I was able to work there during the Christmas break. I just worked as many hours as they would, let me work, save everything, and then spring break, same thing. And then that would take you to summer. My dad had a friend in the DOT office in Appomattox, and he had lined up a job for me in the summer working at a asphalt plant. So I went from battery factory to an asphalt plant.
I'm sure your lungs were just in tip-top condition after that.
Yeah, so I was up for that. It's worked out good. So they had the stone up on top of the hill, and the guy with a front end loader, and he dumped it in the hopper, and they mixed it with asphalt and whatever the goop they put in there, and heated it up. And then trucks would drive under, and they would dump it in the trucks, and then they would come down to where we were with the scales, and they would be weighed. And my job was to stick a thermometer in it, make sure it was the right temperature. And then when they got to the job, they had to check it again to make sure it hadn't dropped below the acceptable temperature in order to be laid. So that was a good job, and we had plenty of opportunity to play with people that came in and out of the office. And and the guy who was the main guy with DOT was there, and he was helping me with my math. I forget what kind of math it was, but whatever, the one I was having trouble with. So we worked on that during the day. So that was a fun summer, and then that paid for fall, and some left over for winter. Worked at Belk's, and then I think it was that spring I started working at a company called Best Products, There was a place where you went into a showroom and you picked out the item you wanted to order, and you wrote up an order, and it went down to the basement, and they found it and sent it up the conveyor, and they called your name over the loudspeaker, and you went and paid for it.
It's almost like
And
Amazon.
yeah, that's right. And so I got to work in the basement, and so you could work, 12 hours or 14 hours a day, whatever they were doing. You just got there first thing in the morning and clocked in and stayed in the basement until they made you go home.
Nice.
And you clocked out and made good money. So that worked out good. And the next summer I worked for DOT again, but I was out on the road. They were widening a road in Alta Vista, and we with the DOT guy, we drove out there together every day, and I did slump tests and compaction tests and all kinds of stuff like that there on the road.
And did any of those skills end up translating over to your time in Vietnam?
Well, they would have probably if I'd stayed in engineering,
Mm-hmm.
because most of my classmates that stayed in engineering ended up working on the roads, laying asphalt or grading or at a rock crusher.
What did you do?
I went to military intelligence.
What type of intelligence did you work with in Vietnam?
Phoenix.
The Phoenix program?
Right.
Can you
Where,
tell the viewers just a little bit about the Phoenix program for those who are unaware of what it was?
right. Well, Phoenix was a program that the CIA had started, and and they weren't supposed to be in Vietnam, so it was, an interesting thing that they did. But they were good at being spies, spooks. But in Vietnam, they set up a pacification program. You were trying to, you know, bring peace to the country,
Mm-hmm.
and so you had a lot of goals that you were trying to accomplish that would, shut things down. And this was run by an organization called CORDS, CORDS, which stands for Civil Operations and Rural Development Support.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah. And the guy that headed that up was a guy named William Colby. And if you Google his name, he'll pop up. He was all around the intel world for many years, and ended up being the director of CIA. And after he finished up his work there in Vietnam, and then a few years after the Vietnam War was over, he was found drowned in the Potomac River as a result of a canoe accident.
It sure is a shame he wasn't wearing his floaties.
Sure was. So, all kinds of fun stuff happens when you're dealing with these people, but they were a little too zealous in their execution of the program. They had it was headed each unit, usually at the province level, throughout the country. There was 40 some provinces, I think, and each one was headed up by a special forces captain and a special forces sergeant. And then they had a group called PRU, the Provincial Reconnaissance Unit, that was made up of Vietnamese who had formerly worked as uh, a part of the enemy, the VC, and most VCs were unwilling participants, but it was either do what the North Vietnamese told them to do, or
Not much of a choice in the matter.
yeah. So there was a program in Vietnam to get these people to come over to our side. It was called the Chu Hoi program. And so the reconnaissance, the people that made up this reconnaissance unit were Chu Hois, were people who were former VCs, but they really weren't. They didn't really believe what they were doing. It was forced labor. So
Yeah.
they willingly came over to our side because we were going to give them protection, and so they didn't mind participating in some of the operations that they had to go on for the South Vietnamese as part of this program. Because we were trying in Phoenix, our job was to identify the leadership at all levels.
And is that typically I'm sorry, what's up?
I hear some kind of noise. I think it's a train. Anyway.
Can I just, real quick to clarify, when you say at all levels, are you talking about like from a provincial level upwards, or how?
Down, all the way down to the hamlet, village, district, province. And so you had, and even the national level, there was always turnover in leadership.
Right.
Sometimes it's graft and corruption. Sometimes it's by being shot or poisoned or blown up or whatever, some military action. So the goal was to bring people that are in leadership levels to justice. Cut off the head of the snake.
Mm-hmm.
And just as fast as you would identify leadership and bring them to justice, someone else would take their place, just like we see taking place today with the stuff that's going on in Gaza and Lebanon and all over the Middle East. That kind of activity always is taking place somewhere, and there's always some program to try to use the word neutralize. I'll throw that in the conversation now, to neutralize the enemy.
Yeah.
The CIA and the press picked up on that word and just beat it to death. That neutralize means, you're killing people. You're just killing people. These people are paid assassins, and we're funding that. We shouldn't be involved with that. These people are war criminals and blah, blah, blah. Unfortunately, there were some authorized activity that took place, and the last straw was they took some person that they had captured out on a rowboat into the ocean and threatened to drown him if he didn't talk, and he ended up being drowned, and it was reported and hit the press and Congress and blah, blah, blah. So the CIA quickly, we had nothing to do with it. And so they looked around and they somehow talked the Army into taking it over. And so when I came in country, the Army had only been in charge of this program for a few months.
And if I may, I'm sorry, you mentioned earlier, you talked about it being under the control of cords. And the CIA worked with cords. Did it maintain? They were cords. Okay, I gotcha. But it stayed in cords control, or no?
Yeah.
Okay, understood.
Yeah, exactly. Even under the Army, it was they still reported up the chain to the director of cords. And so when I came in, I had gone through OCS and had been commissioned as a second lieutenant, and then since I was on my way to Vietnam, then my first stop was to go to language school at Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas. So went to El Paso, spent 3 months there learning Vietnamese. And so that was a good time, because it was kind of stressful on a marriage when you got married, and then 4 weeks later, you're whisked away for 16 weeks of training
Yeah.
in the middle of Missouri, and then you come back for a week and you go report to OCS for 6 months, and so this was the first break that we had to spend 3 months together,
Yeah.
So that was good. And then once we finished up at Fort Bliss, then we drove back across country to Baltimore, Maryland, to Fort Holabird, where the intelligence school was, and went through the tactical intelligence
And if I can
school.
slow you down here just for a second, when did you recognize that your role was going to be in the intelligence, area, not in engineering?
Well, we suspected that this contract that we had with the Army was a joke, So we were all waiting for that gotcha moment. Oh, a contract? I don't see no contract.
Right.
So all of a sudden, this colonel shows up one day, and he said, and we had 2 platoons in our company, and gathered us all together, and he had a slideshow and so forth, and we just laughed and laughed and laughed. And he said, "Okay, I know what you're thinking. You know, I've been through the same thing. You don't trust the Army. You don't trust the government. You know that we're going to pull the rug out from under you. I'm telling you, just listen to what I'm got to say." And so he just gave this whole spiel about the CIA and they had to take over this program. And have you guys really caught on yet as to what a combat engineer is? Combat engineer. You're the first one in with a gun. You're infantry with a gun. I mean, you're infantry with a brain. You're the first ones in. You provide your own security. Infantry's not going to, provide security for you just because you're building a road or anything else. You got to provide your own security. So, yes, we had learned that. And so we're offering you to get in on the ground floor of this new program. And there's no by law you can't go on missions with the Vietnamese to set up an ambush or do anything in order to earn a CIB, which a combat infantry badge, which every infantry soldier who planned to stay in the Army wanted to have. If you didn't, you were nothing. So it's really, we're offering you a better assignment than what you're going to end up with being a combat engineer in Vietnam. And so we listened. He said, I need 54 of you to volunteer to give up your contract and immediately throw that away. Immediately, I'm going to stick another contract under your nose and you sign that. And when you graduate in February, you'll be commissioned as a second lieutenant in military intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And, we laughed and we went back and we talked and with each other and, mulled it over. And he came back and he said, okay, what do you think? And he was able to get his 54.
Nice.
I forget. We probably had 200, guys in the 2 platoons. So he got a good bit of us. And I don't think anybody was sad about the decision they made.
Yeah.
Because we met some of our people over there. We would meet somebody we went through OCS with, and they were still in combat engineering, and they would tell their tales of woe.
Yeah.
And we, of course, would glorify what we were doing. Yeah. Okay, so
You generally, from what I understand, you didn't see combat there. You were mostly dealing with these operatives, for better word.
Well, what
Is
we
that
had in
correct?
my situation, I went into at the province level in Pleiku,
Okay.
which is in the central highlands of Vietnam, which was probably the best place you could be
Okay.
because it was a pretty temperate area. You had two seasons, rainy and dry, but the temperatures never got too hot or too cold. And you had a lot of, lush vegetation. It wasn't jungle everywhere. It was pine trees and deciduous trees.
And I'm sorry if I may ask really quickly. You said there wasn't jungle everywhere. Was Agent Orange used in that area heavily, or was it just naturally not very foliated?
Yeah, it they used it to clear your fence line
Okay.
where you had concertina wire around a village or around a compound, something like that. You wanted to keep the weeds from growing up in it, so you would spray it with I forget what we called it. We didn't call it Agent Orange, but that's what it was.
Yeah.
And I, being a horticulture major, one of the things I did on our compound, because I was not in a mainline army unit like we had in Pleiku province. We had the 4th Division, a mainline army unit. I was a part of MACV, Military Assistance Command.
Right.
And so I was part of a team, a MACV team, Team 36. We had our own compound there in downtown Pleiku. And we had the local natives there were called mountain yards. They were not Vietnamese. These were mountain people. Very friendly people, loved Americans, hated the French, hated the Vietnamese because they did nothing but look down their nose at them and treat them dirty. And so, what did we do for them? Being they're good friends, we put them out in the rice paddy in a Connex container to be security for our compound.
Mm-hmm.
And they were great guys, and you know we we helped them all we could, and they kept us from being blown away.
And did
And
they speak Vietnamese for the most part?
that yeah, I'm sure they had some native language, but they most of them could speak not only Vietnamese but French and broken English, so they could communicate with you very easily. And like I say, we were just natural uh, natural allies.
Right.
They would do anything for us, and we'd do anything for them. And we had a military hospital in our compound, like a MASH unit in Korea. Only ours was called MILFAP, and I don't know what that means. Military something.
Okay.
But they would take care of anybody who got injured. And one night, um, their outpost furthest from our compound was attacked, and one of the mountain yards lost his leg, and they got him into the hospital there, and they had to amputate his leg, and they said we're gonna take care of this guy. We're gonna get a prosthesis for him. We're gonna fix him up and take care of him. I don't care what it costs. If we have to pay for it out of our own pocket, we're gonna do it. It's just the least we can do.
Yeah.
So they did that, and this guy was the village hero. I mean, everybody loved to come up and see his leg and hit it, and
Yeah.
and couldn't believe he was walking around with a plastic leg. And so they were great, and and we did come under fire every once in a while. They would come as close as they could get and fire rockets into our compound, and that was about all that happened to us in town. And the districts, they would do things a little bit more aggressively than they could get away with in town.
Yeah. So you mentioned, I apologize, what was the region you were in called again?
Pleiku.
Pleiku. Where is that in its vicinity to Benoit?
I don't know what Benoit was. I don't know. I don't
Okay.
remember.
I was just curious because it was my understanding that the Phoenix program had some operations going on down there.
Well,
That
I'm sure they did. They had operations in all 44 provinces.
Yeah, there was one specifically with the Benoit Mental Health Hospital that I understood, you know, got them under some fire.
It was probably somewhere down around Saigon, I would imagine.
Hmm.
One funny thing when we were in language school at Fort Bliss, we were living in an apartment complex, and I ran into this guy at the swimming pool or playing tennis or whatever. Got to talking. He wanted to know, where was I headed? Because he knew I was there for language school. And I told him Vietnam and I was going to be in the Phoenix program. Come to find out, he had just come back from Vietnam and he was in the Phoenix program. He said, I would love to meet with you guys and your wives and show them some slides. And I've got some war trophies and stuff I can show you. And he had been there during Tet the year before, the big invasion from the North Vietnamese attack Saigon and most of the provincial capitals throughout the country. There were tank battles and all kinds of stuff. I mean, it was huge.
I'm sorry, if I may, did you not go to Vietnam in '68? Is that correct?
Right.
Okay, so you were also there for, part of Tet, but it had already
No, it
begun
was,
by the time you were
yeah,
there.
it was over. It was
Okay,
over. It took place towards the first of the year,
right.
and we came in, the end of summer. But you could still see the scars from it, like there were blown up tanks, all over Pleiku because there was a huge tank battle
Yeah.
there in Pleiku. In fact, we had a tank at our firing range, and we would shoot rockets at it and blow it up and all kinds of fun things.
Yeah.
We had in Pleiku, we had the province level Phoenix office was called the PIOC, PIOCC, the Provincial Intelligence Operation Center, something. I
Hmm.
don't know. Then at the district level, it was the DIOC. And then by the time I was leaving, we were down to the village level doing VOCs. And so out at the district level, we had 3 districts, and each one of the districts in Pleiku had a first lieutenant there, along with usually a sergeant and a Vietnamese interpreter. And they had been used to going on patrols with the Vietnamese.
I'm sorry, if I
And
may, real quick, where do the PRUs fit in that as well? You mentioned there's an
the
interpreter.
PRUs were basically the combat unit that would head up these ambush patrols that they would go on, and so the American advisor would go along with them and come under fire. And after you got so many hours of live fire, then you could put in for your combat infantry badge. And so these guys, when I went out and visited with them as a second lieutenant, um, they were very cordial. And they said, "Look, you little snip, we, we're infantry, and I don't care what the rules say. We're going to go on. We're going to go on patrols, and you're not going to stop us. Because if we go home, our career is over if we don't come back with a CIB."
Yeah.
And I said, "I understand. You tell me nothing, and and whatever I hear, I forget.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't care what you do. If you get shot and you get killed or get wounded, we'll have a cover story for you and protect you the best we can." But
So I'm sorry, and they're going out on patrols without explicit permission. Who are they patrolling for, or what are they looking for to signify that there's someone who might be an enemy?
Yeah, they're looking for an enemy, somebody in the leadership structure of some unit.
So they have them identified already?
Right, right. They've got them identified, and they've got them targeted, and they have put together an operation to bring them to justice.
Understood.
Sometimes they don't make it back alive, but the goal was to bring them back alive and put them before a court and try them and put them in prison.
Yeah.
So that was our goal, to do that.
Yeah. Where do you fit in this as well? Were you more often on the kind of background, like identifying these people and more of an intelligence side, or were you really active in making things happen?
Well, when I came in country, the rank of the person who was supposed to be running the PIOC, the province level, was a major, but they hadn't staffed up yet. So I came in country filling a major slot, being paid as a second lieutenant. So it was a good deal for them.
Right.
So I was in charge. These guys reported to me. I had two interpreters. Had a a, um, a Spec 4 American NCO, and I had two secretaries. And the secretary's job was to type up reports. Our job was to receive intelligence from friendly units
Mm-hmm.
in support of the Vietnamese. On the other side of the room, the Vietnamese had our counterparts, usually headed by a high-ranking sergeant in the National Police Field Force, which was the military unit of the National Police, and they were usually the ones that headed up the mission to go out and arrest someone or bring them to justice. And they would develop operations to do that. So we would receive information from American mainland Army units, Navy units, Marines, Air Force, whoever was seeing something. They were passing it on. It was coming up the line, and our interpreters would translate it into Vietnamese. The secretaries would type it up. We would pass it through to our counterparts, and they would evaluate whether it was, go through their process to evaluate whether it was, relevant intel, whether it was too old, needed follow up, goes in the trash can, or this is something we can mount an operation for, and then they would pass it on to the appropriate unit. And we would do the same thing on our side. We would, if an Army unit or a Marine unit or some combat unit was the appropriate agency to go after this individual, then we would pass on that intelligence to that organization, and they would develop a plan to bring them to justice. Like when we lost, we had one of our district officers was time to go home and left a space vacant, a job vacant there at the district level. Then by that time, we had gotten a major in our office in Pleiku, but he couldn't go out. He couldn't fly he couldn't fly in a helicopter. He couldn't fly in any fixed wing craft below 4 engines because of his intelligence background. He was more of a crypto. He was involved in and deciphering intelligence that came through, radio or whatever.
Yeah.
Transmitted.
But like deciphering code, essentially.
Yeah, deciphering codes, stuff like that. So
Understood.
they didn't want him falling into enemy hands because he had certain information that would be useful to them. So I continued to do all the work. And so I had to go out and visit these guys and take care of whatever they had. So I went out and took this guy's place while they would, find a replacement for him. And one of the things that we did in that particular district, which was next to the Cambodian border, was there was an artillery base located out there, and they would shoot 81 millimeter shells every night, based on intelligence that we would furnish them as to where suspected enemy activity was. And so I would get that intel from our DOC there at the district level, and then take it over and give it to the captain in charge of that artillery base. And that poor guy had a desk full of, do you know what an Article 15 is?
No, sir, I'm not familiar.
When you do something wrong, you're
like getting
you're punished.
Essentially.
Get written on, that's right. He had a desk full of them. Every drug problem in the world, alcohol problems, racial problems. He was afraid to go to sleep at night. And I felt sorry. We all felt sorry for him, but nothing we could do except give him something to shoot at night, keep him busy.
Yeah.
And so he appreciated that. One night, we're, starting to go to bed, and we come under fire. You can see the tracers, coming in and being shot at, and eventually figured out where it was coming from. It was coming from that artillery base. A lot of times they would do live fire exercises just to check their weapons and check their, the area of fire that they were that they were responsible for. But being on drugs and alcohol and so forth, they were just shooting. And fortunately, nobody was hurt. But the 4th Division was just up the road, a large infantry division, and they had shot up a leper village a few weeks before that, and we had to go out there and write up a report on it. And that was the nastiest thing you could ever imagine. And so we were writing a letter to our congressman saying, get these people out of here.
Do you mind me
awful.
asking, that leper village, that wasn't associated with Tiger Company and My Lai and whatnot, was that?
No, okay. No, this was in Pleiku province. Okay. They were all over the country.
Yeah.
And the other thing was, we were right on the road that led into Cambodia. And in those days, the party line was, we're not in Cambodia.
Right.
But we were all over Cambodia. We were, helping the Cambodians, and because the main trail, came down through Cambodia and then turned and came into Pleiku and then the province above us, to infiltrate into Vietnam. So we had to interdict. That's where Agent Orange came in. It was mostly used along that trail to defoliate and open it up so you could, see movements, troop movements. And so we finally started evacuating Cambodians from that part of Cambodia just to get them out of the way because, we needed to shoot it up and spray Agent Orange all over the place. And it would just be, the height of cruelty just to leave these civilians there. So we were bringing them out, and they were coming right down the road in front of our compound. And people were out there getting war souvenirs from these people. And I was stupid enough not to get anything, but they were getting 9mm Chicom pistols, and all kinds of rifles and stuff that these people had that could be traded for all kinds of goodies. But it was it turned out my main job out there was we had two special forces guys that were stationed close to the border along a creek, kind of like they were a forward, operation there to eyes and ears watching, giving us early warning if the enemy was coming down the road. I don't know how they made it without being killed, but anyway, it was time to shut that down and bring them in. And we didn't have enough room for them in our compound. So we had some lumber that had been, positioned there to do something with. And so the major in charge of that said, he'd learned by that time I had an engineering background and been a combat engineer and just wasn't a pretty face, So he said, would you mind, taking charge of that? So that was great. So, poured a concrete floor and erected walls, and put a roof on it and got it ready for these guys to occupy. So by that time, my tour of duty was up and I went back to the province level.
Yeah. I'd love to chat with you a little bit more about, your job there with the province level and the PRUs. You talked a little bit about how the Vietnamese would look over the information and make sure that it was good enough for them to follow, orders as a result of. What was the vetting process like for the Americans to, verify the information we were getting before we made any action on it?
Obviously, we corresponded with each other. I mean, we were like, we were advisors, so we were supposedly superior to them. That was, totally false. It was their country. Mm-hmm. In most cases, they knew who the enemy was because, a few years earlier, they were all working for the same police unit, In fact, the top guy that was the number one on our hit list used to be a captain in the National Police Field Force, and my counterpart, was a good friend of his. So it was kind of like our Civil War. You had brother against brother, family against family, and so everybody knew who this guy was. They'd recognize him on the street, and so one of the tricks that we would do in order to pull this guy out of his cover so we could mount an operation against him and arrest him and bring him to justice is we would arrest his wife, or they would arrest his wife and make it known to him, that we had his wife and where she was and the whole deal, and set a trap for him, hoping that he would come that far out to try to get his wife free, or at least see her or do something. And so that that game was played over and over and over again. And towards the end of my tour, two of the guys on our team, one was a PSYOPs officer in charge of psychological warfare, right, which means he had nothing to do. Every day he would go over to the Air Force base there in Pleiku and swim or play tennis or goof around. And his best friend, his roommate, was our engineering officer, who was a Carnegie Mellon graduate, a chemical engineer. He had nothing really to do. And so they paired up with each other and played tricks on the secretaries and played, games over at the Air Force Base and did whatever they did, But finally, the PSYOPs people down in Saigon, got wise to this guy and said, you know, we're not hearing anything out of you. We're not seeing anything that you've done that's been of any value, and we're going to have to do something about it if you don't come up with something. So those two came to me and said, we got to come up with some kind of a psychological warfare thing. And we've decided what we'd like to do is some kind of a pamphlet and airdrop it.
I do think I've heard about this one before, but please
yeah,
continue.
What can we do to help you? Who are you trying to get that this would help with? And I told them about this guy, Dang Man was his name. And they designed this flyer and dropped it. And sure enough, somebody squealed on him, because we were the other program that was part of the pacification program under courts was resettlement villages. Take away these unprotected villages that the VC were harassing and forcing to work for them, and we built a fortified village for them and put Vietnamese soldiers there to guard it at night, and basically take them away from the enemy so they couldn't get to them. And so we had just finished the newest resettlement village, and Dang Man with his little goon squad, came out and attacked one of the corners of this village and was killed. And the Vietnamese love to, make a show out of, their quarries, like a guy got a 12-point deer and he straps it on the hood of his Jeep and drives it through town, and everybody comes up and sees it. Oh man, 12-pointer, that was great. And so they had Dang Man laid out there, and some of his goons, in descending order, were laid out. All their weapons were stacked. And the province chief and his counterpart, our colonel, came out there, and the press was out there taking pictures and all the stuff. And it was just like one big, festival celebrating the victory, the witch is dead and the whole deal, with this guy. So that was pretty satisfying, because I had, in order to keep from having to serve some duty, some stateside duty when I got back, because they had moved the intelligence school from Fort Hollywood, Maryland, to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and we had met people who had been trained there, and they said, you don't want to go there. I mean, it is in the middle of nowhere. It's a desert. It's horrible, nasty. And you got, racial problems, drug problems, alcohol problems, everything in the world. You're just going to be dealing with Article 15s the whole day long.
Yeah.
And so I extended for 3 months by extending my time in Vietnam for 3 months. When I came back to States, I would and land in San Francisco, then I could fill out the paperwork and get out of the Army 3 months early, and be done with it right there, and fly back across country as a civilian. So that's what I did.
You've now mentioned twice. I'm sorry, I don't mean to move right past that, but you have mentioned twice the issues with racial tensions and drug and alcohol. Was that something that you witnessed personally over in Vietnam at all?
Absolutely, yeah.
Can you tell me more about what you saw with it?
Well, your basic uniform was this, like a smock, not a smock, but like a jacket with, pockets on the side and pockets up here and epaulets. and then pants with with pockets like everybody wears today,
Hmm.
and and boots, and a baseball cap, a green baseball cap. Except for Phoenix officers, we drove around in a black Willis Jeep wearing a black beret.
Okay.
And I said, well, gosh, why don't you go ahead and complete the outfit by painting a target on the Jeep?
It does not seem to make a whole lot of sense for
I
intelligence
said,
community.
well, I don't think, I mean, nobody's going to make you wear it. So I threw that black beret away and got a Vietnamese beret, or I just wore my baseball cap. So anyway, the baseball cap was the normal part of the uniform. And why am I talking about that? What was the question?
That's okay. I was just asking what your experience was with
Oh,
racial
okay.
violence and drugs and
Yeah.
alcohol.
Okay. So haircuts are a big thing in the military. Okay. So they had backed off of enforcing um, strict rules for hygiene and so forth. So you had, and that was the day when Afros were big. That was the big way for a black man to wear his hair, and so you had these, the bigger the better. So you'd have these guys with an afro, like this, with a baseball cap sitting on the top of it, with one of those, combs, stuck in the side, just daring somebody to do something about it. So that was uh, we didn't have any problem at a team level because we were we conducted ourselves in a different way than you would have in a military base like the Fourth Division had. You got barracks and you got people in close quarters and you got people going on patrols and dealing with death and destruction all the time, or you're just laying around and you're drinking and you're doing all kinds of stuff there on the base, and you're just daring somebody to do something about it. So there was, fighting and stuff going on all the time, and so that so you would see evidence of that when you had to go somewhere, like you went to the PX or you went to the post office or you went to some place where you would have cross pollination with mainline unit people, Fourth Division people, and so we tried to stay away from that as best we could, and we be on guard, uh, not knowing that these people are a little bit closer to exploding than we are. So don't do anything to provoke anything. You might live to regret it.
Yeah.
So you see stuff like that. Um, the way they wore the uniform or didn't wear it. Just just a show of rebellion.
Yeah.
You
Understood.
know, I'm not gonna do what the man says.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do this, and it just wasn't black members. It was all races,
Yeah.
and we had of course Koreans were our ally in Vietnam, and they were mostly in the I Corps, the northern provinces of Vietnam. We were in the central province, and there were two provinces below us, and so there was some cross pollination, troops moving up and down through a pretty narrow country,
Yeah.
and so you'd run into stuff all the time.
Can I ask the kind of tension there? You said that it seemed to be an attitude of like kind of sticking it to the man in rebellion. Was there a tension between African American soldiers and white soldiers, or was it more of like a tension between African American soldiers and white leaders or officers?
Well, you had that too. You heard the word frag.
Yes.
The term that was used, and a frag is hooch. It was just, just like it was just, said in jest and casual. You're talking about throwing a hand grenade in somebody's room.
Yeah.
Because you didn't like his looks, you didn't like what he said, you didn't like what he did, you just don't like, the branch he's in, or the fact that he outranks you. It just doesn't take much. And even in MACV, we had that. We had the district that I was in for a few months. The major who had been in charge of that district before I got there had his hooch fragged. Fortunately, he wasn't hurt, but from then on, he didn't drive into town or have anybody drive him into town. He would walk into town, and it was not a short distance. It was 10 or 12 miles through enemy territory, and he was scared to death and just couldn't wait to get out. And fortunately, he made it out. But and then like that captain at the artillery base, I mean, he just I don't know how he made it. How could you?
I'm sorry. Do you know what provoked either of those things?
It was just rank and I don't know if in the case of the major there, if he had done anything to provoke it. He always reminded me a little bit of Yul Brynner in his bearing. I mean, he was a cast in Hollywood kind of a guy. He dressed right and he was fit, and he expected people to do what he said and blah blah blah. Probably if he had knocked it down a few notches, it would have made it a lot easier for him, but he wasn't made that way. So,
yeah.
Fortunately, he made it out.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear it. If I may, I'd like to pivot a little bit and talk a bit about drugs and alcohol and how that was used. I'm, aware that a whole lot of soldiers liked to drink beer in Vietnam or whatever else.
Where'd you hear that?
I have my sources. I think I saw it on Wikipedia once. But can you give me some insight into what the culture was like surrounding alcohol?
Well, let's take, for example, on our team, we had a couple of guys. This was their second tour. We had a tank captain that was there during Tet. He had a scar that went from one end of his arm all the way up and came out his shoulder. AK-47 round had got him. He was in a tank battle there in Pleiku on his first tour of duty. And what was the question? Sorry.
Just if you can tell me about the culture surrounding alcohol.
Oh, alcohol. And then another captain who was there in outside of Saigon. He was in charge of a company, an infantry company that had come under attack and had lost just about all of his men. He made it out alive, but most of his unit was killed, and he hadn't gotten over it. So his day would start at the bar there in our compound. We had our own bar, and everybody, in our part of the compound were all officers, and most of them, well, not most of them, but some of them were on the second tour. They should know how to conduct themselves. And but he was there in the morning, and he was the last one to leave at night. He was just, I mean, he was an out and out alcoholic, and it was all a result of the trauma that he had suffered in that first tour. He just couldn't deal with it. And I don't know if he was able to, to survive that or not. But, you hear PSD and PTSD and alcoholism, drug addiction, of course, was just starting to be a problem. And when you're under that kind of stress and are having to deal with, that kind of a lifestyle, some people just don't handle it well. And so they turn to something to kind of make it go away and end up with something worse.
It's hard not to hear that and be sympathetic to, someone who's dealing with that now.
Right.
But I'm curious, back in Vietnam, you had someone who was in your company who spent their days at the bar, and they were drunk all the time. Was there any like resentment or anger about that?
I think most people understood.
Yeah.
I mean, they would see it and then they would start asking questions, and then they would hear the story and they would try to be empathetic.
If he was in a different situation and he had not obviously been through something so troubling and traumatic, right? Or let me rephrase. Was there anybody who really leaned heavily on alcohol, and not necessarily so much as a response to trauma like he did, but just kind of were being juvenile and hedonistic, if you will? Was that not a thing, or?
We didn't have that in the officer quarter. I don't know what they were dealing with at the NCO level, but never really heard of any problems like that.
Okay.
But if they were to occur, they would be dealt with.
On the officer level, was there any drug use that you noticed outside of alcohol?
No.
No.
Like I say, I mean, it was just starting to become a problem. But here's what was going on stateside. I'd been through basic, I'd been through AIT, I'd been through OCS, went to a combat zone, and we heard, and the Army was dealing with, and the wave was coming behind us. I was moving in this direction, but all of those problems we were talking about was starting and was coming up the line, and I was ahead of the curve. So the Army was dealing with these problems by putting beer machines in the barracks.
And how is that a solution?
No. But somebody that had stars on his shoulder or clusters thought it was.
Right.
It was. I mean, what in the world?
Yeah.
Let's not worry about personal hygiene as much. Let's don't worry about haircuts and stuff like that. Let's just back away. Doesn't work.
Yeah.
Doesn't work. So that was going on, and probably still goes on. The Marines, didn't have as much trouble because they didn't back down. You want to be a Marine, here's what we expect. You don't make it, go be in the Army.
Yeah.
We don't need you.
To elaborate a little bit more, I'm sorry, I don't mean to fester, but as for the drug use not concerning alcohol, obviously if you were with the officers, and I imagine there was much less, but did you hear much about marijuana use and heroin use? And I'm really curious about whether or not there was kind of a racialized divide in what drugs the NCOs used.
I really don't have any experience with that. I mean, while I was in basic or AIT or in OCS, never
Never ran into it.
never encountered anything like that.
I gotcha.
But
Okay.
I'm sure it was taking place. And like I say, I mean, it was coming up the line as I was, going in this direction. So I was out and about, and and I saved myself some trouble by being warned about what was going on at Fort Huachuca, so I was able to take precautions and not get caught up in that.
Yeah. I speaking of Fort Huachuca, you mentioned that you were in Baltimore for your intelligence training. What kind of things in intelligence training do you think really most well prepared you for being in the field?
I cannot tell you one thing
Yeah.
that I can't tell you one course.
Is that because you don't remember the courses?
All right.
Understood. Um, I was curious if you even do you recall at all whether or not you felt as though you had been prepared well?
No,
No.
I didn't feel that at any level of training.
Yeah.
We were being basically in basic training in AIT and even in OCS, we were basically being taught how they fought in Korea. Using the M14 was our personal rifle, personal weapon of choice.
And that switched to the M16 at some point in Vietnam, am I correct?
It was being used in Vietnam,
Oh, okay.
but it was all the way at the end of OCS before we had a few days of training with the M16. That's all we had. And
That's
as an
brutal.
officer, we had one day of training with a 45, which was our required
Sidearm, yeah.
personal. Yeah.
Wow.
And we never could understand it. Or going through engineering, and we were being told you might be running a rock crusher. We never saw a rock crusher. We were never taught how to use a rock crusher. We were told that that if they were being blown up, you signed for it, so you're going to be personally responsible for paying for it, which scared me to death. I can't pay
It just
for a
seems
rock crusher
ridiculous.
on a soldier's pay,
Yeah.
and so stuff like that went on. I don't. We were building. I told somebody you need to check into this. You need to check. You need to check into this because the bridges that are being built in North Carolina to replace the bridges that were washed out are the same kind of bridges we were taught how to build in OCS. You ought to contact Fort Belvoir and send some of those guys up there for a few weeks to build some of those simple bridges,
Mm-hmm.
um, and or get the Corps of Engineers. They've got you know uh, the Bailey bridges that were perfected in World War II that by the British. We were taught how to put them together in the dark. We could build them blind. The same thing with pontoon bridges and stuff like that. We were building stuff like that, but they weren't using things like that in Vietnam. There was no,
Mm-hmm.
they weren't using Bailey bridges. They weren't using, you know, post and lintel wooden structures and stuff like that. That was stuff that went out with Korea, but they're still useful information.
Yeah.
Um, the first Christmas I was in Vietnam, I built I built a barbecue grill, a brick barbecue grill,
Yeah.
this wide and deep and that high. I mean, me and my interpreter spent several days.
What'd you cook with it?
We cooked steak
Heck yeah.
once a month. We would entertain the guys that flew the little Piper Cubs around. As they were spotters, they would fly out and try to get the enemy to fire at them, so they could determine where the area of operation of that particular unit was.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a pretty stressful job. I mean, it's one guy in a Piper Cub,
Yeah.
trying to draw fire. You know, you got to be crazy. So we would bring them over and we'd play volleyball and cook out steak and just show them that we appreciate them. We understand the kind of stress they're under. We did the same
Yeah.
thing with chopper pilots. They were stationed there too, so we would entertain those guys, and they appreciated it.
Yeah. So again, I'm gonna pivot a little bit here because you said something while you were talking about your training. You said that you know you didn't feel prepared to be in Vietnam through any of your training, and you mentioned that they were training you like it was Korea, and you were just poorly equipped for Vietnam. Given that, have you ever given thought to some of the anti-war movement's claims, more so just about the lack of preparedness from the government?
NC war movies? What's that?
I'm sorry, anti-war movement.
Oh,
Like the
anti-war
hippie movement, the anti-Vietnam protests, etc.
Yeah. No, I was more concerned about what was happening in Paris with Kissinger, and we were working as the number one of 20 pacification goals. We had the highest success rate of any of the 20 things that were on that list of things to do. When I left country.
I'm sorry, from the Paris Peace Accords, is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm sorry, I'm confusing you. No, I'm talking about the pacification program goals that courts had set up.
Okay,
These
I
are
gotcha.
these are the 20 things we need to accomplish in order to bring peace to this country.
Gotcha.
And in 1970, when I left, the country was, by all measure, was 98% pacified. There was no main line unit activity taking place at all from the North Vietnamese. We had bombed them and poisoned them and whatever we could do to shut them down, given what restrictions were placed on us by Jane Fonda and the Congress of the United States. So it was a peaceful country on the way to being what it is today, a thriving economic giant in that part of the world, thanks to China. But we could have been China. I mean, we were China in those days. We were the daddy. We had the largest bank of computers in the world outside of the United States in Saigon. I mean, it was a huge building because in those days computers, were huge.
Yeah.
And a Japanese car manufacturer, I forget which one it was, had already negotiated with the Vietnamese car, which was copied from the French car, the Citroën, or however you pronounce it. In Vietnam, that same car was called La de Lot. And the Japanese auto manufacturer was negotiating with them to build an auto plant in Saigon, which would have employed thousands of people.
Yeah.
And they had huge deposits of coal that had been shut down during the war, and that was now coming back. And South Vietnam was a net exporter of coal. South Vietnam was a net exporter of rice.
Mm-hmm.
The railroad system that had been blown up, for years had been basically put back together. South Vietnamese had their own Air Force, not Air Force, but airline company, Air Vietnam. And they were flying all over the place, and trains were running all over the place. And they had beautiful ports where you could actually, put a boat right up against the shoreline. It was so deep. The water was so deep and clear. We said many times, it's a shame that the French were the colonial power here. If it had been the British, you can only imagine, what a place this would have been. All you had to do was go to Hong Kong. This could have been Hong Kong, But the French tend to not run their colonial property as well as some other countries.
Well, so it sounds to me like from your observations when you were leaving the country, it seemed to you at least like the war was nearly over. What do you think?
The war,
happened?
yeah, it was over. It just wasn't over at the peace table, except it was just about because Nixon was bombing Hanoi and the targets in the north, and till that was stopped, and it was very successful. I mean, it was bringing them it brought them to the table, and they were about ready to give up. But you had anti-war activists like Jane Fonda and others who were traitors to the United States and were supporting the enemy and giving them the courage to continue to fight, thinking that victory was just right around the corner. The United States is just a paper tiger. They're not only gonna surrender to us, they're gonna surrender at the peace table. They're gonna meet our demands, but they're gonna rebuild our country. That's what America does, and that's what we did. And the pants I'm wearing here today were made in Vietnam. But who knew? But it was a shame to see that taking place and know what was the real story on the ground, and then read the paper at what was going on in Paris. And they just signed a death warrant of 13 million people for somebody's gain. Somebody made money off of that.
If I may, Operation Phoenix was active at the time that you left, of course. And at least from my own understanding, it was nearly at its height there. Not just in its power, but in its influence, and that it was doing a lot to aid the war.
That's right.
If that was the case, and the war was nearly over there, why do you think the program kept on going for another 5 years, as did the war, and where did the program start failing? Because clearly Saigon did fall 5 years later.
Yeah, Saigon, and basically from within. I mean, we overthrew the government of Vietnam several times during the course of the war, and the administration that was in power when I left was not looked upon favorably by the Vietnamese people. They didn't really support their government.
Do you mind me asking who that was? Was that
Two,
BN?
I think.
BN two?
Huh? Yeah.
Okay.
And I can't remember the sporty guy who ended up moving to California and living a nice life. I can't remember his name, but wars make people rich. Not you and I, but
some
people higher up the food chain. You peel back the layers and find names of people that supported Hitler here in this country, and it would shock you. Mm-hmm. The names of people who were benefiting from prolonging that war, while your friends and neighbors and my friends and neighbors, like my neighbor across the street who lost his life there, hard to justify that when people are doing things just to line their pockets. But somebody will take care of
Yeah. I'm curious because you obviously had a whole lot of interaction with, you had a Vietnamese counterpart and also just the general population there. Um, can you just tell me any stories you have about your experiences with the South Vietnamese population? Um, and if you can recall any moments where kind of cultural um, things of cultural importance were exchanged?
Well, the most contact I had was with, well, when I first got there, it was me and a secretary and this nasty room, about 5 or 6 times as big as this room, with just, dirty light bulbs hanging from the ceiling, floors that were dirty, leftover furniture being used. You had for hygiene, you had to go out and go to basically an outhouse that was just you wouldn't want an animal to use that, but that was what you had to do, especially the women. And so my desk and my secretary's desk was like this, and she sat here and had a typewriter, and behind us we had this nasty cabinet that we kept office supplies and stuff in. And then down this side of the room was a long table, and it had interpreters, and it had police, and it had secretaries there, and there was the sound of typing and talking, all day long. And through mine, and then I was assigned an interpreter who sat over there, and he would translate stuff that we passed over there to him to translate into Vietnamese, and then he would translate stuff that was coming from the Vietnamese and bringing that over to us. And so those are the people I got to know, most personally, because I was
Yeah.
dealing with them all day long, and they could speak. The interpreter obviously could speak English, and the secretary obviously came from a well-to-do family. I mean, she wasn't some gutter snipe. I mean, she was educated. I mean, she didn't have college training, but she was a sophisticated human being. And so when I got my Spec 4, the first thing we did was buy some paint, and we painted that cabinet, and we painted the furniture that we had, and we bought paint for the Vietnamese to paint their area, and we got some brighter light, and washed the windows, and got some natural light and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Got the roof fixed so it didn't leak. And so we one of the first things we did was put in for some money to build a real facility that would accommodate human beings and would accommodate the work that we're supposed to be doing,
Hmm.
which we got, and that was completed in just a very short period of time, a brick building. And and the engineering officer, one of the major things he did was, because in European countries and colonial countries, they're using DC current, which has to be stepped down to AC in order to run your typewriter, or if you have electric typewriters, or a television or radio, anything like that, you got to have AC. And
Hmm.
so he was able to put a transformer in a room that we built into the building to do that. So we had up to date modern electrical power. We couldn't do any plumbing in the building, which was a shame because we really needed to build a restroom. But in the provincial building that was just across the turnaround there was a 3-story building, and there were restrooms in there for higher up. So we got permission for our people to use that because we're not garbage, you know. And we're doing a valuable service. So that was good. And so getting back to your original question, one of the things that happened along the way once we got rid of all of the bad blood that had been done between the Vietnamese and the Americans, you know, we didn't like each other. And Americans liked to.
Initially, you mean?
Yeah.
And
yeah,
are you talking specifically about your counterparts or civilians as well?
No
worries. Oh, if you need to take 2 minutes, feel free.
No, I just got a cramp.
Okay.
And that was just a known thing that Americans and Vietnamese didn't really get along well. And they had certain rules of the game that we didn't understand. And being Americans, we don't take the time to really learn the rules. We just come in and impose their will, and you gotta do it because we're the boss. And so we tried in our little piece of the world, try to make that go away, treat them like real people, got them the equipment that they needed and the paper and the supplies and the pens and the stuff that they needed to do their job. And they respected it. And one show of respect was, and I didn't even know that my secretary, Co means a single woman, and her name was Tu, T-U, was married to a national policeman. And so she was passing on to him, what was happening, because this was part of a national police operation. And first thing you know, they're inviting me to their house for dinner. And saying, oh, gosh, I don't know. Where do you live? And she was saying it was, in the center of town. I don't know.
Did you end up going?
Oh, yeah. Can we bring weapons? I mean, would that be offensive? And because if I was to be caught in something, not that you had anything to do with it or anything, but just because we live in a war zone, if I was to come under fire and I'm not armed, I would be court-martialed. And I don't want that. And another thing that they like to have us do for them was you could order anything that Sears Roebuck carried out of the Sears Roebuck catalog, which in those days was like that thick, and mail it to San Francisco. And in a few days, you'd get your whatever you ordered from Sears. And so it was around Christmas time, and they were all presenting me with their shopping list and American dollars to pay for the, So when I went to her house, one of the things that she had ordered was a model airplane, a gasoline motor plane, whatever you call that. It's not a radio control plane, but it's the kind, on a string and goes round and round. She had that mounted, with a spotlight on it and everything up on a wall. She was very proud of it. Yeah. And all kinds of stuff like that. So, and